we'll introduce Mary first and then just go over what we think might work for this, our first digital lunch talk of the spring semester. Mary is the, let me get your exact title in my other doc, the Nancy L. Buc, 65, Pembroke Center Archivist. She, sorry, switching back to my video, is the first full-time Pembroke Center Archivist. Before coming to Pembroke Center, she served as administrative librarian at the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America, which is part of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Prior to joining the Schlesinger Library, Murphy served as archivist for the Boston Redevelopment Authority. She began her career as a library and archives reference assistant at the Georgia Historical Society in Savannah. She holds a Master of Library and Information Science degree from Simmons College and a Master of Fine Arts degree in Historic Preservation from the Savannah College of Art and Design. So Mary, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being the guinea pig in the first of our virtual lunch talks. So Mary's going to be able to show slides. We hope that will work during this talk. And what I thought we would do with the group chat for all of the students and everyone else who's on this is that we made the chat private so that only I and I think Mary and Sabina can see the messages. And if you have questions as Mary's speaking, basically use the chat function to record your questions. And then when we're done, I'll just sort of go through the scroll and call on people, and you can ask your questions that way so that not all 10 voices are chiming in with questions at the same time at the end. I think that's about it. Thanks, Mary, thanks for doing this.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen now and let's see how this goes. If I somehow disconnect, I'll call everybody back. So just to preface this, today we're joining together, and as you may have seen from the description of the lunchtime talk, also picking up on the Sarah Doyle Women's Center's Radical Roots initiative, I thought I'd talk today about the concept of radical archives and how the Pembroke Center Archives mission fits under that scope. And we can talk about that and brainstorm together about how we think that fits. So I'm going to just speak a little bit about the history of our mission and what we do, and go through what my job is like in case any of you are interested in doing this type of work for your careers moving forward. And then I thought we would just do a discussion. So I'm going to talk for just about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll go to Q&A. All right, so here we go. Hold on. Okay, so if I could get a thumbs up. Yep. Okay, great. Okay. So I'm going to look at my time here. Okay, so the Pembroke Center Archives at Brown University. I think today I'd like to begin with a quote as I was thinking about the topic of radical archives. So I woke up and I thought of one we all have heard about before. Tell me if you have. And it is, feminism is the radical notion that women are people. And I was thinking in my own kind of naivety, I credited that to, I was thinking in my head maybe it was Gloria Steinem or something, but it's not, it's Marie Scheer. And said, well, she was a feminist and I think she's still alive. And she made that quote or stated that quote in 1986. And so I thought that was very interesting because in essence, the radical nature of the Pembroke Center Archives is that it is simply targeted towards women and non-binary people. So that in essence makes our mission radical, at least somewhat in my mind. So before I start, I like to start all of my talks with simple definitions, and then I'm going to go into the history of the Pembroke Center Archives. Just to be sure everyone here is clear on what an archives is, because I think that there's a lot of jargon and sometimes there can be confusion about what we do. So what is an archive? They can be collections. An archive can be a collection of historical documents that evidence a person's life and work and or document an event, a place, an institution, or a group of people. And of course, archival collections are considered to be primary resources. So one other little factoid that I'd like to offer before I start talking about the history and mission of what we do, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. What is an archival item? You all create them in your own lives. So an archival item is a primary resource, and it can be anything from a letter to a diary, to manuscripts, to audio recordings, to photographs, anything that was created at the historical moment being studied. So I like to use the example of maybe someone who was at Stonewall, participating in the protests and the riots there in 1969, going home and writing a diary about their experiences there. That diary can later be studied as an archival item. Other examples might be text messages between organizers of Occupy Wall Street sent to one another in Zuccotti Park. And of course, all of our Facebook, Instagram, and social media footprint, that is all archival material. Okay, so let's talk about why the Pembroke Center Archives is doing what it does to collect all of these types of items. And we are doing that for research purposes. So, women at Brown University began to be educated at Brown in the late 1890s. They were allowed to do this. They were welcomed as we enter the 20th century, but they did so in a somewhat separate but equal manner on campus under the umbrella of what became known as Pembroke College in Brown University. This was the case until 1971, when Pembroke College and the Men's College finally merged completely together. In 1971, at this time in Brown's history, there were women power players around and on campus, whether they be faculty, administrators, or some very powerful alumna. One example is my namesake, Nancy L. Buc. She graduated in the class of 1965. And so by the 1970s, she is an attorney in DC and in the Virginia area, and she's a real power player. And what herself and other fellow women at the time came to understand that the history of the women at Pembroke College and Brown University was being lost. That after that merger happened, there was an erasure of women's history, and these women became concerned right away. What was happening to their histories, and how are people going to learn about what happened at the Brown campus in terms of women's history? So between 1971 and when the Pembroke Center emerges for the study of women, gender, and sexuality at Brown University, there was this conversation happening. What is going to happen to our records? How are women being studied? Are women being left out of the historical record and special collections? What are we going to do? So the Pembroke Center is founded in 1981, and by 1982, we evidence our first oral history being recorded at Brown about women. And this started within classes, just like we see today, and amongst a few women faculty members and alumna that began to interview one another about their experiences on campus. This truly was the seed initiative that gave birth to the Pembroke Center Archives. In 1986, our first official archive is established, the Christine Dunlap Farnham Archive on the history of women at Brown and in Rhode Island. And then it was later, not until 2003, that we established our second archive, the Feminist Theory Archive, about feminists and queer theorists in the academy. So what is truly our mission? It is to document the history of women and non-binary persons at Brown University and in the state of Rhode Island. Our next mission point is to document the history of feminists and queer theorists and scholars of difference in the academy. These last 2 points are very important. Our goal and our work, our mission, is to increase the percentage of special collections by and about women, with an X, held at the John Hay Library at Brown University. And our last point is we are here to create a foundation of research material upon which new knowledge can be made. We're bringing together all the ingredients, and we want all the brilliant minds to be able to read through that material and rewrite those history books, basically to include women. So we know that there was a gap set out on its mission. We have done the data studies. Since I've been here in 2016, we've now done the number count. And we know that prior to 1982, 92% of the collections held at the John Hay Library were by and about men, predominantly white men. About 8% of those collections had anything to do with women at all. So between 1982, 2016, when I joined, and today, we are making some headway. We are working so hard, and now we see the fruits of the labor. We have about 24.5% of special collections at the John Hay Library we now believe document women's history. We, of course, our mission is to continue to up that percentage. Our goal is to go to 51% of special collections should be by and about women, if we're really going to bring forth the full story of women at Brown, in Rhode Island, and in the Academy. So again, here are two of I just bring some images of our two archives. We've got the Christine Dunlap Farnham Archive that documents women at Brown, notable alums, and what I think is a really interesting piece of the puzzle as well is the history of women in Rhode Island. We're doing a lot around feminist practitioners, feminist organizations. We just brought in the records of the Women Project as an example of one of our current collections that we brought in. And then at the same time, we're bringing in collections like those from Joan Wallach Scott, just started sending material. She, of course, was a notable figure of women at Brown and a theorist. So she's considered a bridge collection. And I like to show pictures of some of our donors here. This is important to me that folks understand that donors of archival materials, number one, aren't always dead. They are living and breathing and creating history in their lives every day. And we have a rainbow array of faces that we have collected materials from and that we work with to document their lives and work. So we've got World War II figures in Martha Sharp. We've got Milana in the top right corner there. She's our student curator of the Milana Krongelb zine collection, which I highly recommend. It's an incredible collection. We've got Justice Gaines as activist and political figure in Providence, and Mimi Peachy, reproductive rights activist, and so on. So we have really hundreds of collections document women's history at Brown and Rhode Island. And then we have the Feminist Theory Archive. This is our special collection, our archive that documents feminists and queer theorists, scholars of difference in the Academy. So notable figures, of course, some that you will recognize. These folks, these scholars, do not have to have any affiliation with Brown. They can, but they can also be simply from the outside. Other organizations, history makers. The point and the reason why we target these scholars is that they have centered the study of gender and sexuality right at the core of their scholarship. And they've really changed the way that all of us study a myriad of subjects, whether it be English, history, biology, as you see with Anne Fausto Sterling papers, and so on and so forth. So here are some of the beautiful faces that have contributed or plan to contribute some of their papers or all of their papers to the Feminist Theory Archive. You've got, of course, Judith Butler in the top left corner. She's probably maybe our most famous scholar who might be coming in. She's committed to donate but hasn't started. Naomi Shore in the bottom left corner marked our seed collection. Hers was the first collection that we brought in, and she was a she worked on literature and literary criticism. But then we've got Mimi Tai Win in the center. Mimi has committed to donate. She not only studies transnational feminism, but she's also a zine artist. She's probably one of the most famous zine writers really in the country right now. And so we just are so thrilled that she's made a commitment to share her scholarship and her work around zines and zine culture. And then, of course, we have Hortense Spillers in the top right, my top right, your top left, maybe. So Hortense donated. We have the Pembroke Center has been working to acquire Hortense's collection since 2009. I worked very closely with Anne Ducille, another Black feminist theorist who is a dear friend of the Pembroke Center, to secure Hortense's papers. They are pristine. They're just beautiful, and we are so proud to have them, and they came in this last summer. And I can talk about that trip. That was a really wonderful collecting experience. So as I'm watching time, just somebody raise their hand when I'm running close on my time for the talk, but I do like to talk about my experience in the field and what it's like to be an archivist curator. I do work with an assistant archivist, and so now my role is really one where I work with all of you, promoting our collections and bringing in new collections and working with our donors one-on-one. Then my assistant, she is with me on those field trips, and then the collections move over to her plate, and she begins the hands-on processing and technical work for the majority of our collections. I also do some of that when I have time, but your bandwidth, you know, it only goes so far. So Amanda's really been a godsend, my assistant archivist, on that front. So how do archivists, how do curators, how do we bring in these collections? First, I spend my days researching. I'm always reading, always looking, always paying attention to what's happening with brown women and women in the academy. I'm always looking for interesting folks who are doing groundbreaking, game-changing things. We're here to document history, so I'm always looking. And then I usually begin with a cold email, as opposed to a cold call. I start with a cold email. If I'm lucky, we have some sort of connection. I can play 6 degrees of separation and say, oh, we hosted an event last year that was about your research or touched upon your research, or we maybe have a personal connection through Brown or something that I can leverage. But I really just have to reach out and throw my line in the water and ask these people if they had considered their lives as potentially interesting for others to study, and if they've ever considered the idea of their personal archives, and if they might consider Brown University as a safe place to put those collections. If I'm lucky, they will nibble. They'll take a bite at that email and they'll say, okay, this sounds kind of interesting, or yeah, let's talk about this. Or I'm ailing. I have been thinking about this already. My legacy, there is some of that. And if I'm lucky, I'll get them on the phone. And at that point, we talk together and we just see if it's a good fit. Sometimes it's not, we don't win every time. And sometimes we find out together, maybe their collections aren't quite right for us. But then other times it really is a great fit, and I'm very excited about all that. And hopefully after those phone calls, I try to schedule a visit to meet with them in person. Home visits are an integral part of my work. They are hard. It is hard work. It's very personal work. It's also incredibly inspiring on so many levels. And this is what some of that looks like. So this is actually in the home visit that was not successful. We have not yet brought in this collection. This is in the home of Eve Kofoski-Sedgwick down in New York City. Eve has passed away, and so I was visiting with her widow. This was right in 2016, 2017 when I arrived, a collection we would love to have as part of the Feminist Theory Archive. You can see all the boxes were already somewhat stacked in her home. And it was a joy to meet with her widow, but he isn't quite ready to part with her collection, and at least has not made a decision to donate to us. So even if these trips aren't successful, they still can be fruitful in the learning process for us. And then here we have Faith Wilding. She's, of course, was part of Woman House. She's also attended, because of her feminist scholarship, the Pembroke Seminar for many years. And that gave us a way to introduce ourselves to her. And she has committed and has already donated some of her feminist theory seminar materials to our collection. So this was over in her home on the East Side, and I got to visit with her, and that was quite lovely. And then here I was in New York City with Sylvia Federici, founder of the Wages for Housework, co-founder of the Wages for Housework campaign. She's a Marxist feminist, Italian-based, originally now in Brooklyn. This was a really lovely experience, but what I always show this slide because it details how the push and pull. Sometimes people can be ready to donate, and then sometimes they aren't. And so you can see from our body language in this slide, my understanding is that we were headed to our apartment, and she is a lovely woman, but I was thinking, okay, we're gonna sweep through and we'll pack up all these boxes. You can see all this amazing material all around her, and it's gonna be fabulous and quick. And it was not quick, and it was item by item. She wanted to look over everything and make sure we understood the significance of each piece, which I certainly understand, but it was hard for her to let go, and it usually is for our donors. The first donation of material they give, there can be emotional connections to that material, and it can be hard. So as opposed to leaving with 20 boxes that I anticipated, we came home with 3.5 cartons of material after 2 days of work. But we continue to try to move forward, and she has now continued to donate at a more rapid speed once we've built trust together. And that is what is a key point, I think, of any radical archive, is this idea of keeping trust. It would be our kiss of death if any of our donors felt betrayed by what we had done to their collections. We take very careful, thoughtful steps to ensure that trust. Whenever we finish a collection, our draft document that we create, known as a finding aid, goes to our donors. They review all of that material with us so that they are comfortable with what eventually goes online to be open for research. We want them to know that this is an ongoing relationship that we have with them, and we want to do right by their legacy. Okay, so let's see. Oh, and here's another one. This is Kate's house. This is a favorite one. So part of the job is that, you know, these radical people create radical archives, and I just love Kate Bornstein, who graduated in 1969 from Brown University, a performance artist, trans activist, and just wonderful human being who I adored working with. And Kate had all of her records in a storage room in her basement in New York. And she let my assistant and I have at it, knowing that it was like this storage area. So this is an image of myself. I'm sitting on a computer box that you can see on the left, and going through some records and finding some old documents in her closet. And we came away with wonderful, wonderful correspondence. That leather jacket that's right above my head is now in the collection, and you can see her wearing it in the right image of the photograph. These are just beautiful things, and we just dove in. That's all I can say. And it was really quite a wonderful experience. And then Kate came to speak on campus. Again, we want to continuously always engage our donors. We consider them part of the Pembroke community for always. And places can be dusty and storage spaces. They can also be cold and dark. And I wound up in Chicago in December. This was to collect the Barbara Johnson papers. And then you can see Wayne Kostenbaum on the left, who also chose not to donate. We were after some of his early gender theory writing, but he thought it would be a better fit at another location. And I think that he is right in the end, but it was quite lovely to meet him in New York and visit his storage space. The Chicago in December, that was also a great visit, but it was cold in that storage facility for sure. So then I just have some other slides about what we do with the collection and organizing these documents, bringing them from chaos to fruition. But I think in terms of the radical history, the radical archive, I think that comes out most notably in this back half of our work, where we process collections, in how we look at the collections. My assistant and I are coming in with the knowledge that we have around women's history, around feminist theory, and we want to bring that forward. So we are looking for potentially different things than other catalogers and processors might be looking for. We're looking for the stories that are going less documented, that are going underdocumented. Here in this image, we have Diane Middlebrook's collection. She wrote biographies of Sylvia Plath and Billy Tipton, and she was just this brilliant feminist writer. But one of the fascinating things that I learned about was simply about her own life and the relationships in her own family. and the documentation that she had that was just truly hidden. And then this treasure trove comes forth out of this collection. And so we had to really sit down and think about, how are we going to catalog this collection? How are we going to make it accessible to our researchers? Because our researchers might not be the same as researchers at other archives. We're trying to bring in everybody, the whole picture. And we want to make sure everyone is fully welcomed and tuned in and pulled in to our archive. And that is through our cataloging and description efforts. And so you can just see more of this. Another example of these cataloging choices that we make was through, I mentioned Milana Krongeld. She's our student curator. She graduated in 2019 of our zine collection. Milana and I worked together on that collection. She had this keen eye about zines that focused on social justice and marginalized identities. And it was near and dear to her heart to make sure that we found these rare materials and brought them in, copies that are of these zines that are no longer available anywhere. She set up this collection to mirror one that she had previously established at the Sarah Doyle Center. And so we now have sister collections, one for community access and one that is now housed at the John Hay Library for long-term preservation. But Milana cared very much, and I agreed with her, that we needed to adopt a language, a way to describe these zines that was respectful to the artists and to the topics that these zines documented. So we changed the finding aid, and I asked Milana to sit down and write out an explanation about the language and the cataloging words we were going to use and why they might be different, why they might break the rules of Library of Congress subject headings, which they did, and why we were doing that. So I highly recommend, and I can maybe send a link later to that finding aid. It's really a work of art. Each topic and subject heading that Milana chose to use that was different than those that are allowed through the Library of Congress has a really beautiful definition. And so she really spells out her mission behind that collection. And at the Pembroke Center Archives, that's the whole point. If we need to break the rules, we will, in order to document history that is otherwise being buried, lost, or ignored. And this just shows you how the chaos of a collection on a table comes to order. And then here you can see the background of our finding aids. We catalog everything online through archive space. And then it goes up and you can search for our women in collections and people and organizations. And you see these beautiful documents that rolls in all of our cataloging language. And here you can see this is Sylvia Federici's Wages for Housework Inventory. We catalog everything to the folder level when we're working on a collection. So nothing, it's really, as I say, it's really artisanal work that we're doing here. And it is only through, point being here, the support of Brown University that we are able to do this. Brown may have been flat-footed in the 1970s around documenting women's history, but they took actionable steps to change their game. And so I always start these presentations and it's critical. It can be critical of Brown. But I don't know of other organizations. I mean, singularly, they were so far ahead of the game to pull themselves up short, understand that something was going wrong, that there's this huge gap, and then actually contribute resources, university resources, to bridging that gap. There are very few other university archives that have done the aggressive, actionable work that Brown has to be more inclusive around its special collections. So my hat's really off to the John Hay Library and Brown University. And I can tell you more just a little bit during the Q&A about that partnership between the John Hay Library and the Pembroke Center. We do all the upfront work, and the John Hay Library stores our collections and provides research services access to them in perpetuity, which is a huge commitment the John Hay Library makes. And this wouldn't really be possible without the John Hay Library and their cataloging infrastructure and just our working partnership together, which is very strong. So instead of kind of going into how do you find the stuff, unless you want me to, perhaps if you want to change to Q&A, you can let me know.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea. Why don't we do that, Mary? Thanks.
Okay, cool. Should I escape my screen share?
Sure.
Okay. Ooh, stop share. Okay, here we go.
All right, so everyone, now's the time. If you want to write some questions into the chat box, you don't even have to write the whole question. Just, write your name and say you've got a question, and then I know, and then you can unmute yourself. While people are thinking about it, I had a question started us off, Mary, which is,
Sure.
you had said, sometimes a collection is not a good fit. And I'm wondering, when is a collection not a good fit? And in general, what do donors want to know when they're making a decision about whether to put their materials with you or not?
Well, it can be a couple of reasons. Wayne Kostenbaum is a great example. So I think that he really presents the best example. So you all might have heard of Wayne Kostenbaum through his writing with Vogue magazine. He ended up taking his scholarship and really coming into non-scholarly environments with his writing as his career went along. I think he even appeared on Sex and the City a couple of times. So he's been around. He's a performance artist. But he teaches at the graduate school at NYU, and he studied under in proximity to, but he was close with Eve Kofoski-Sedgwick. So we have these overlaps that I thought, okay, this person might be quite interesting, and the fact that he leans towards queer theory, right, as more specifically than feminist theory. So I thought that was important. But then as we came to talk, his work is a lot of fiction writing that was not theory-based necessarily. And so the more we looked at his work and got to know each other, we really enjoyed one another, but we could see, we just kind of got the feeling once we talked that maybe it wasn't the best fit. Coupled with that, he was also looking at other archives, and the other archive offered him a substantial amount of money to put his papers there. So we don't pay for our collections, and we provide high-level archival service and curatorial assistance, but we don't actually pay for the stuff. And he took that money, and that was it. So, and I do understand that. So.
Okay, so it looked like Maggie had a question.
Hello. I had a question about cross-campus collaborations. If you could talk about if you've done projects with classes or like centers on campus. I know Felicia's here, or she was here. I don't know if she's still here. And I saw Gail for a second.
Yeah.
Work with like the Sarah Doyle Women's Center or like the LGBTQ Center, and kind of what do those collaborations look like?
So we do a lot of that. Maggie, I've visited your classes before. I have hosted your class at, I can't remember if we first met at the Hay Library. I do offer guest lectures, just sort of like this, what I'm doing today, at the Hay Library. If folks want to see a ton of different collection material, we pull that back. Once our materials go over to the Hay for long-term storage, we don't take them back out again. So that means my classes, when I'm doing a guest lecture, we go to the Hay, and that's wonderful that they can accommodate us there. Otherwise, I can go to other places and talk just like this. So I visited in the time of COVID. This is, I think, my third for this semester. Normally, I'm doing about 6 guest lectures in the spring. It's my busiest time. But then we do other collaborations. So I am very much engaged with the Sarah Doyle Center. I've just struck up a really wonderful relationship with Gail and Felicia. And we did the lunchtime radical research luncheon about radical archives and radical librarianship. And I was also going to host another conversation for them about another women's history initiative. So we are very active with the Sarah Doyle, and we were very close around the zine project. That was a full partnership. So now it kind of ebbs and flows. I have done less with the LGBTQIA plus folks. I haven't had the opportunity to do so yet, but I've worked very closely with Virginia Thomas, who's working to document queer history in Rhode Island. And my other really fun project right now is with Kate Wells over at the PPL, which is cross-institution work. We're co-curating a 2021 Providence Public Library exhibit on tomboys. So the working title right now is More Than Skinned Knees, The Many Meanings of Tomboy. So that will be downtown. And we're working like crazy to see if we can pull this together, especially now. So we will report back on that work. So it's just such a wonderful part of my job to be able to make these connections. Oh, and we're always open for research. Everyone is always welcome to contact me at any time. We are here to assist every student on campus with their alternative research needs.
Nicole, it looked like Nicole had a question as well.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Mary. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us, and thank you to everyone else for organizing this as well. It's great. My question was how you if you could talk more about how you got into this particular field of work, maybe about what sort of educational or background or experiences that you would require or recommend to become an archivist, because as an English PhD student, I've used a lot of archives, but and admittedly, I haven't really thought so much about the work that went into getting all of those things together. So if you could tell me a bit about how you sort of got into this.
Yeah. I mean, so the thing about archives is if you are a scholar and you find your way into archival research, it can just really open up this whole world. And then you find out there's all this like pre-work that's been done like on your behalf, and it's all like somebody has literally created a cookbook for you for how to find material, and that's just so wild. So I was a US history major at a very small college in Wisconsin, Beloit College, which I loved. I knew that I wanted to work hands-on with history, but I didn't know how to do that. So by watching television, I learned about historic preservation, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to go work on old houses. This is what I'm going to do. So I went down to Savannah because there are very few projects that work on built environment and history, or programs, sorry. So, and I just happened to focus my work at SCAD on documenting LGBTQIA historic sites in Charleston. I thought that I was just interested in that work. And at the time that I was doing an internship, an old drag bar was being torn down by the College of Charleston. And so as an intern, they assigned me to do research on this site because they knew I was a feminist and had liberal politics, and this is at the time in the early 2000s. So it was a different era in the American South, right? And so I went ahead and researched. That's how I got my kind of basis of my research. And when that program was over, I was fortunate for a research assistant, a paraprofessional position to open at the Georgia Historical Society. And that is where I met a bunch of professional archivists, women, who told me you could do this for a profession. So I was just helping people with their research needs on the front line. I was a bartender of information, but those women at the Georgia Historical Society really schooled me that this is something that I could do if I got another master's degree in library science. So they directed me to Boston, but I was already working always and interested in women's history, queer history, just as a personal interest. And so that's where I kind of focused my work, and was just fortunate to always be lucky enough to hook on to archives that were doing that work. Since I started the Schlesinger, I think in 2008, which was a rough time to start there, but I was very fortunate. And ever since then, I've been doing this stuff.
Thank you.
So, what I would recommend.
Yes, please.
In my era, you had to have the 2 degrees. You had to have a master's degree in library science and a second master's degree in an area of interest. Mine was historic preservation.
Got it.
I don't feel that is the case any longer. I think our country has gotten way more real about the finances of education. So I think that you need to focus on, pick an interest area that you really compels you. And if you're interested in doing this work, then go get a library science degree, but you don't need that second master's degree. I think you still do need a library science degree to make any money in this field. But you don't need to spend 80 grand when you have whatever it was, so.
Great, thank you.
Susan, you're up next.
So I was just going to ask if there are any other radical archives And so, you know, you've think of yourselves as a radical archive. Are there others around the country that are radical archives as well?
Well, I mean, that's really funny. Like, are we or are we not a radical archive? I mean, I think that question, like, I love that idea, but like, then I also hate the idea that like, a women's history archive makes us radical. Like, oh my God, are we still there? But, so it's a love, that's a love-hate thing for me. But yes, there are other archives. I think the two foremost in my mind would be the Lesbian Her Story Archive in New York. That is very much a community-based archive. I believe it's in I've never been there, but it's in a residence. It's in a non-institutional facility. And I hear it's just like a magic mystery tour, lovely, wonderful place. Another archive, because I'm from Minnesota, I have a lot of, you know, knowledge base around the upper Midwest. The Treater collection at the University of Minnesota is probably one of the richest LGBTQIA collections in the country, and that's through the University of Minnesota. That I would consider a radical archive. It was established by its founder, last name Treater, and he just happened to be an avid collector in his home for years, and then he turned the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel, over to the University of Minnesota. So a lot of individual donors. Another instance around this is, you know, other really notable collectors whose research focuses on our worlds we keep an eye on. Gail Rubin is, you know, of course, feminist theorist and wrote extensively as an anthropologist around gay culture in California and in San Francisco. And her research corpus is supposed to be just incredibly outstanding. And so that's a personal collection. And my understanding is that I think she does welcome people to contact her if they're interested in seeing it and maybe using those resources.
Jim McGrath?
Hi, this is great. I've actually been emailing with Milana this week.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and yeah, I think her work's fantastic. I had two questions, and they're just like what your thoughts are. One is, how does the sort of turn to post-custodial archiving maybe impact the work that's happening at institutions, even with the particular emphases that you have? And then I do a lot of digital work, so I'm curious about you know, the work to increase access or the challenges of curation that might approach, you know, the collections that you have, or if you've seen some good models for that kind of work elsewhere that you'd like to emulate at some point.
Yeah, so community archives, post-custodial responsibility for archives, I think is a really complicated, tricky subject. And I have to say that, you know, we're all kind of watching and learning about how partnerships between, let's say, institutional archives and a community-based archives, how they can work, if they can work at all, especially around curatorial work and the concept of like removing an archive from one place to another. So we, what can I say? I have seen there's some realness involved around the finances of long-term care and storage of these materials. There's the amount of resource required to carry an archive for the long haul is unbelievable. I think it's, what is Harvard? They benchmark, and I think it's something crazy. Like it's like $1,000 a carton to process. And then it's $1 or like $1.50 a box per year in perpetuity or something like that. But they have boxes that stretch from New York to California. I mean, it's just a lot. So I think institutions have that grip. They have that financial underpinning that can be helpful. You see that in partnerships like around Documenting Ferguson, right, where they've done some partnership with area institutions, but that community archive is leading the way. Then you have institutions, again, like the Lesbian Her Story Archive, that are totally on their own, and they've been extremely successful and strong, running purely as an independent archive or as a community archive. So I don't have a good answer. All I can say is that I'm interested in that, and I'm watching that. At the Pembroke Center, this year we've had an issue because of our connection to Sylvia Federici. She's just so fabulous, and she's helped us open and her mentor, a graduate student at Brown, has helped open further connections for us to other Marxist feminists in Northern Italy. And we were just about to go on a trip to do more work around collecting of a cohort of women, all connected with the International Feminist Collective Wages for Housework movement in Northern Italy. And then of course, COVID-19 stymied us, but we had to have a lot of very honest and frank conversations with those women about what our intentions were, what they wanted, why they were engaging a US archive. We have many, many conversations. One of the key points for them is that everything must be digitized. They were not loving the conditions that were being offered in their area and regional archives, and that's why they wanted to look to an institution that could maybe do some a little bit better preservation. But the access point is that it was always that it would always in perpetuity be accessible to everyone around the world. That is a heavy lift. So going to your next point, committing to digitizing an entire collection, even one collection in its entirety, is not cheap. I think it's $1.50 a page. And now we know that I think each side, $1.50. And we know that a carton of materials contains about 2,400 to 2,800 sheets of paper, right? So this is not a cheap endeavor. There's a lot of that. That's all I can say. Around digital projects, I actually recommend one of our own, which is the Kate Bornstein Records papers. You can look in RIAMCO, RIAMCO, the RIAMCO database, and we have a specialist at the John Hay Library and Rock Library, Cody Ross, who is fantastic, and he is doing experimental work around providing access to all of Kate Bornstein's digital life. She is fabulous as always and wanted us to try our hand at preserving everything from her life and work. And I went down with another expert and we downloaded everything from her cloud. Text messages, emails, 44,000 photographs, but it's just so beautiful and rich with information about being a trans person in the United States when she was out and transitioning, and her life before and after. And it's just a beautiful collection, but you can check out how Cody has lined up that material for access through that finding aid through RIAMCO. We want her digital life to be streamlined with her paper life.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I've talked with the Hay about that project too, and even just like how you archive an email is like just like a whole thing that I think they're doing a real great job thinking through right now.
Yeah, it's been so fun. So we meet in my office. We group up with that group every so often. There's 4 or 5 of us, my assistant archivist, Cody, Andrew, and a couple of others from time to time. And then we just are trying to like work through each step in the process to provide. One of the things is how do you provide access to all those files? So it's at the item level. It's crazy, but it's been really fun.
Great. Last call. Anyone else have any last questions for Mary? Yeah, I don't think so. Anything else that you wanted to add, Mary? Yeah.
Yeah, so just that I am always available. We say the Pembroke Center Archives is more than a research archives. It is a safe space for students at Brown University. So if you would like help with your research and you don't really feel like talking about it with other people on campus, you can talk to us and we will do whatever we need to do to lower those barriers to access for you. You can email me at mary_murphy1@brown.edu. Everyone is welcome to come on into the office, have a coffee clatch with me, and we'll just take it from there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, have a good day, y'all.
Yeah. Great. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.